Being a research supervisor is incredibly rewarding. I actually find it one of the more rewarding parts of my job. And there are a few reasons for that. One is that you get to be sort of on the sidelines of watching new research happen, which is really exciting. And since generally speaking, you're going to work with people who are somewhat related to your own research, it's sort of a way to have, an eye in to cutting edge research that you're not necessarily doing yourself, but you're watching happen and that you can kind of nurture in a way from the sidelines. And you get to have quite a personal and individual relationship with the researcher who's doing that. I think one of the other things that's really wonderful about supervision, which sometimes doesn't get talked about as much, is that in the way we now supervise at Glasgow, having a first and second supervisor, you get to work with another staff member as well. And a number of the people that I work with, we've really adopted a co-supervision model. And so we work with the students together, we often meet together, and sometimes that's across disciplines, so it's a great way to work on an interdisciplinary project. So you're really expanding your horizons, working with a student and another staff member at the same time.
When I think about rewards of being a research supervisor, I suppose immediately what comes to mind are my interactions with international students. Because so many international students have committed so much to coming here, not only them but their families as well. Sometimes a whole village contributes to the fees to send someone here, and it's so rewarding when you find someone has completed their PhD, goes back home, contributes back to the society that they came from. I supervise so many international students that I've had that experience on so many occasions. And people keep in touch as well, so you do really know how well they're getting on and what they've contributed back to that village or town or whatever that's supported them. And the responses of their families as well, because sometimes their families contact you saying how pleased they are. Or they come to graduation and you just see people graduating. So we had some Nigerian students recently who graduated, and they had their children and other family members there, fantastic photographs, and obviously it meant the world to them and their families.
I think for me the biggest reward is feeling that you've made a contribution to somebody's development as a researcher. When they come out of their PhD viva and they've obviously been successful, you can think back, what they were like when they started and now where they've got to, and feel that you've made some contribution to helping them develop in that way. And I think anything that they achieve, whether it's their first publication or maybe a prize for a poster or a prize for a presentation, and you think, well, maybe I helped them in some way, then I think that's the rewarding aspect of it for me.
I think that students can often spur you on. They can provide you with ideas, access to maybe cutting edge literature that you haven't quite had the time to encounter yourself. They can provide you with all sorts of inspiration that can help you in your own research. But for me, the pleasures in many ways are seeing someone develop their own research, develop their own ownership of their research. It may be that they've come up with a project, it may be the project has been set in train by the academic, it could be a linked project for instance, but seeing the student gain ownership over that. So it's very much their ideas, materials, and then of course the research they do in the field or in the archive or wherever they actually do that research, the laboratory perhaps. But just seeing them develop, seeing them become, if you like, confident, and often they do become confident, or it can take a while, fully fledged academic, someone who is publishing, presenting, probably eclipsing the achievements of their own supervisor. That kind of thing is magnificent.
Seeing your students come up with solutions to problems and coming up with ideas and taking research in a new direction that you wouldn't have thought of or you hadn't been engaged with at the start of the research, that's also a really exciting process, and it that brings the whole research process alive.
I think it's great to be able to work with students who are passionate about your subject, and working so closely with them you can build up a really good rapport, which is one of the benefits of working with PhD students. I also enjoy the PhD students' success. So when they deliver a good conference paper, or they publish something, or they get to, for example, stay in a translator's house and work on a novel, all those things, their achievements, I also find very rewarding.
They often tend to raise questions that I perhaps haven't thought about in that particular way, and then that's quite interesting. Perhaps they find a new framework for analysing things, and just looking at things through a new language or a new perspective is really, really exciting for me.
Some of the biggest rewards of being a research supervisor for me are that I actually had what I would classify as quite poor supervision as a PhD student, and so I always swore to myself that if I ever supervised students that they wouldn't have the experience that I had. So I guess the rewarding part for me is when I see students really enjoying PhD supervision and really enjoying their PhD experience. That for me is really rewarding. I purposefully have chosen to co-supervise with some supervisors in other parts of the university. So although I tend to supervise in the School of Education, I've got one student who's in the School of Maths and Statistics, and I've got another student who's in the dental school. And I've done that purposefully to, in some ways, learn about supervision from different disciplinary angles, and I find that really rewarding, learning from others in terms of how they supervise, but also the different perspectives that those students have from coming from a different background.
Well, I think for me it's one of the most rewarding parts of the job, because as an academic there's nothing better than just the opportunity to discuss on a regular basis really interesting topics with really motivated people. And I think also that, you know, for me personally, there's a lot of satisfaction in seeing a project come to fruition, you know, taking it from that initial, sometimes, you know, quite ill-defined research question and seeing that all the way through to a completed thesis. That gives me real satisfaction, and it's, you know, I've really enjoyed working with the students that I've taken through that process. And another part of that is seeing the career development of the PhD researcher, both during the process and afterwards, because you know, obviously things don't stop on the day that the thesis is submitted. You'll then, you know, often work with the successful candidate to develop the thesis into a book. You know, you provide advice on job applications, postdoc applications, provide references, and I think in many cases that kind of paves the way to some quite fruitful longer-term collaborations. That was certainly the case with my own PhD. You know, I worked with one of my supervisors for a number of years in a very, very rewarding, productive way.
Well, I think for me the biggest reward of being a research supervisor is seeing the students come into their own, seeing them realise that they're actually doing something that's valuable, that they're finding out something new, that something that's important to the rest of the world.